Maybe it's because we're 13,000 kilometres away, but I'm not sensing Australia's anxiety over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which of course might be good because we've had our fair share of angst and anxiety in the past 2 years, have we not? But this invasion, and that is exactly what it is, by Russian leader Vladimir Putin, has enormous ramifications for the world, including little old Australia, far, far away. You see, this has been Putin's plan all along. Many have written about his dream of recreating a smaller Soviet Union-style empire within the old USSR borders. He didn't celebrate the policy of glasnost. Putin, no openness for him or the end of the Cold War. Putin was KGB through and through and was actually in East Germany in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. To Putin, this was an absolute tragedy. He and his KGB comrades saw this change in social philosophy as civil disobedience, anti-authoritarian rhetoric. He was no embracer of protest movements. And Putin still sees democracy and political change as dangerous, which is why he thinks he has some historic right to redraw some of the boundaries in Eastern Europe, a point not lost on the US president today.
Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? This is a flagrant violation of international law and it demands a firm response from the international community.
Tony Abbott is 120% correct that this invasion is Putin building a new Iron Curtain and a new axis with China, but I'll get to China in just a second. But Scott Morrison was also correct today to express repeated concern for the Ukrainian people, because as those who specialise in international security know only too well, Putin does not respect Ukraine's sovereignty. He doesn't even value their very existence.
Obviously, Ukraine already has been suffering from this war, and we shouldn't forget this already for more than 7 years at this point. It was only that Russia, until now, didn't openly admit that they were involved in the fighting in the east of Ukraine. Putin has been very outspoken about his very quite strange views on Ukraine, saying that it basically doesn't have the right to exist as a sovereign country. It never was a sovereign country, and so on. And of course, the worry is, well, where does this lead if he...
So if he doesn't think they have a right to exist, you can imagine what he thinks about their existence to be alive, to keep away from bloodshed, to be involved in a war. Can you imagine what orders he is now prepared to give? So what happens now? We will see increasing sanctions and counter-sanctions, which will hurt Europe more than countries, of course, like Australia. Russia exports oil and natural gas, which will see European prices rise. And anything manufactured in Europe, it will spike in price too. So think the cars that you get from there, machinery, clothes, chemicals. There'll be a flood of refugees. That's already begun, and that will include Australia.
We will also be looking at the options for humanitarian support in terms of visa access to Australia. And I'd stress with Ukrainian citizens, this wouldn't just be through our humanitarian program. It would be through the many streams of our migration program: skilled migration, student visas, other visas, family reunion visas, things of that nature.
And in the US, officials are warning of supply chain disruptions in semiconductor and aerospace industries. Fertiliser supplies will be impacted in Europe as both Ukraine and Russia export fertiliser. That will hit European agriculture and, in turn, food prices. The world's stock markets have already been spooked, and that volatility will only increase as the invasion turns bloody. This new Iron Curtain will disrupt and destabilise cyber networks as well. And as even our own federal agencies have told their minister, it could lead to cyber attacks on banks and power grids. Now, that could be Australia's greatest blowback to the support we offered today to the US and the UK, a cost the Prime Minister says we have to bear.
Australians always stand up to bullies, and we will be standing up to Russia, along with all of our partners, like-mindeds, and all of those who believe that it is absolutely unacceptable that Russia could invade its neighbour and seek to extract some concessions or advantage out of threats of terrible violence upon its neighbour.
You know, the Federal Treasurer, he called it early, suggesting about 2 weeks ago that such an invasion would hurt the world economy at a time when we all need to rebuild from COVID-19, not go further backwards. And with the world's eyes and various military resources trained on Putin's forces in Ukraine, hold on a second, what a perfect time for China to occupy Taiwan. They could do it this year without a hand laid on them. And it sounds as if the PM is alert to that possibility as well.
We can't have some suggestion that Russia has some just case here that they're prosecuting. They're behaving like thugs and bullies, and they should be called out as thugs and bullies. And quite sadly and tragically, the sheer force of that violence of a thug and a bully is about to be impacted upon the people of Ukraine.
As I said, we don't need another excuse to be afraid or anxious after COVID, but we should not underestimate what kind of major fork in the road this is for the world and what ramifications it has even for the Indo-Pacific. After all, the Russian and Chinese presidents met face to face just 19 days ago. And at that meeting, the pair denounced our AUKUS agreement with the United States and the UK. This seems to matter to Vladimir Putin as well. It is no coincidence, too, that as Joe Biden stumbles through his presidency, Russia has defied the West and illegally taken Ukrainian territory. We know how determined China is to make Taiwan its own as well. Russia has been the first to press go. The world should now not ignore what China does next.